A one-pawed shepherd dragging itself across the road shouldn't have survived. But it did. And when a veteran stopped to help, the truth he found was darker than any battlefield. Someone had trained this pain. Someone had cut to make him obey. Before you watch what happened when justice came back for them, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me your city in the comments, because this story isn't just about cruelty,
but for
it's
understanding.
about courage that refused to die. The wind coming off Highway 191 carried a dry metallic scent, that mix of dust and diesel that clung to every roadside in southern Arizona. Tom Harland squinted against the glare, one hand resting on the steering wheel of his old Ford. The hum of the engine had always soothed him on long drives the way silence used to in the barracks. But this afternoon something broke that rhythm, a shape staggering across the asphalt ahead. He braked hard. The tires squealed, dust rising like smoke. What he saw next made his breath catch. A German shepherd ribs visible under a thin coat of dust was dragging itself across the road, front left paw missing clean at the joint. No blood, no tearing, just gone. The dog collapsed halfway to the median, panting, its good paw trembling as it tried to stand again. Tom jumped out his boots, crunching the gravel. "Hey, buddy," he called softly. Hands open, voice steady, the same tone he used back in the Marines when calming wounded K9S under fire. The dog froze but didn't growl. Instead, it lifted its head, intelligent eyes amber and alive, staring through him rather than at him. Then slowly, it tried to crawl forward. Not away, toward him. "Easy, Tom," whispered, crouching. He could see the edge of the wound now. The cut was too clean. A surgeon's precision, not an accident. Someone had done this, on purpose. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around the dog, lifted him gently into the truck bed. The shepherd let out a low whine, but didn't fight. Tom turned the truck toward the nearest veterinary clinic, tires biting into the sun-baked highway. For 20 miles, the only sound inside the cab was the slow, ragged breath of the dog behind him, and the faint rattle of the dog tags that still hung from Tom's rearview mirror, reminders of men and dogs who hadn't made it back. At the clinic, a middle-aged vet with kind eyes, Dr. Marla Deaton, examined the wound. She ran her gloved fingers along the edge, frowning. "This wasn't an accident," she said finally, her voice heavy. "This was deliberate." Tom felt something cold knot in his chest. "Deliberate?" he asked. She nodded. "See this line smooth? No tearing? It's been cauterized after cutting surgical precision, not a trap, not a car. Someone knew what they were doing." The words echoed inside him like a gunshot. Tom looked at the dog again, now lying sedated under a warm light. His chest rose and fell, each breath shallow but defiant. Marla cleaned the wound, but when she reached for the dog's collar, she froze. "There's no tag," she murmured. She checked behind the ear, then the shoulder blade. "Wait, there's a chip." She scanned it. The device beeped once, then displayed an error message code corrupted. She frowned, tapped the reader again. Same result. Whoever did this, they didn't just take his paw. They tried to erase him. Tom stared at the machine's flickering light. "Can't be erased if someone remembers," he said quietly. That night back at his small cabin outside Tucson, Tom couldn't shake the image of the shepherd dragging himself across the road. He sat on the porch, cigarette in hand, listening to coyotes yipping in the distance. He'd seen men lose limbs before, in deserts far from here, under skies thick with smoke. But there was something different about this. The dog's eyes weren't broken. They were waiting. For something. Maybe for someone. Tom rubbed his temples, feeling the old ache crawl back into his bones. "You're out," he muttered to himself. "No more wars. No more saving things you can't fix." But when he looked through the window and saw the dog sleeping fitfully on the old rug by the door, something inside him shifted. He'd said those same words years ago after his last deployment when he swore off anything that could bleed or need him. And yet here it was bleeding and needing, and somehow it had found him. He stubbed out the cigarette, opened the door, and sat down beside the shepherd. "Guess you're staying," he said softly. The dog stirred one ear, twitching. Tom reached out and rested his hand gently on the animal's shoulder. "We'll figure this out. Whatever they did to you, they're not going to get away with it." Outside the desert, night held its breath, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called once and fell silent. By morning, the desert light had turned pale gold, brushing across Tom's porch like a hesitant hand. The German shepherd lay curled near the screen door, his bandaged legs stretched stiffly, chest rising in steady, shallow breaths. Tom poured himself black coffee, the kind that bit back, and watched the dog from the kitchen. He'd decided to name him Shadow. It felt right the way he'd appeared out of nowhere, bleeding yet unbroken, trailing some unseen past behind him. When Tom stepped outside, Shadow lifted his head instantly, alert but calm. His eyes tracked every movement, disciplined, not fearful. "Morning, Soldier Tom," muttered, setting down a bowl of water. Shadow didn't drink at first. He waited until Tom stepped back 2 paces, then lowered his muzzle and drank methodically, no slurping, no frenzy like he'd been trained. Tom crouched beside him, murmuring softly, "You're no stray, are you?" Something flickered in the dog's eyes, recognition maybe, testing a hunch. Tom said, "Sit." Shadow obeyed without hesitation, "Stay." The dog froze, muscles taut but focused. Then Tom whispered, almost without thinking, the words that once meant everything in the sandstorms of Fallujah: "Hold fast." For a split second, Shadow stiffened, then sat straighter, head lifted, eyes locked on him like a soldier awaiting command. Tom's stomach tightened. "Jesus," he breathed. "You know that one?" It wasn't a common phrase, not for civilians. Hold fast was something his unit used in the field, a quiet vow to stay alive, to not break when everything else did. Only handlers used it for K9S trained in combat zones. Shadow wasn't just a lost dog. He was one of theirs. But how did he end up mutilated and alone? Tom's hands trembled slightly as he scratched behind the shepherd's ear. "What the hell happened to you?" he whispered. Later that afternoon, after feeding Shadow and cleaning his wound again, Tom snapped a photo with his phone. The dog's solemn eyes, the shaved fur around his injury, the faint scar on his flank that looked suspiciously like a burn mark. He posted it in a private veterans group online with the caption, "Found off Highway 191. Dog missing front paw. Looks trained. Anyone recognize him?" He didn't expect an answer, but within 10 minutes the post exploded with comments. "That's not a stray. Looks like ex-military stock. Tag the handlers group." One message, though, came through privately. No name, just a profile with an American flag and a quote from the Marines' Semper Fidelis. The message read, "If that's the dog I think it is, he wasn't retired, he was discarded." Tom reread it 3 times, his jaw tightening. Discarded. He typed back, "Who are you, what do you know?" But before he could hit send, the account vanished. Message deleted. Profile gone, like it had never existed. A chill crawled up his spine. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him, and stared out at the horizon where the road shimmered in heat. Discarded. The word stuck like a splinter. That night, while Shadow slept beside his couch, Tom pulled out his old footlocker from beneath the bed. His service records, a few medals, a folded flag, and photos of men and dogs he hadn't spoken of in years. He flipped through them slowly until he found one that made his breath hitch. A younger version of himself stood beside a K9, almost identical to Shadow, same deep amber eyes, same proud stance. The name on the harness read Rex, but it couldn't be. Rex had been declared KIA in 2016 after an explosion at a checkpoint near Kandahar. Tom had seen the report, had attended the memorial. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. Maybe it wasn't Rex. Maybe it was just coincidence. But the next moment made that thought impossible. From the floor, Shadow stirred, his head lifting. He stared at the photo in Tom's hand, then let out a low, trembling sound, not a growl, not a whine. Recognition, memory, pain. Tom's throat tightened. "No," he whispered. "You can't be." Shadow, or Rex, pushed himself up, limping forward until his nose brushed the photo. Then he rested his head in Tom's lap, trembling. Tom sat frozen, tears burning behind his eyes, the weight of guilt pressing into his chest. "They said you were gone," he murmured. "They said you never made it home." He wanted to believe it was impossible, but the evidence was there, the obedience, the scars, The way he responded to the same words no one else would know. And that message discarded. What kind of man throws away a soldier? The question haunted him long after midnight. Somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the faint desert wind outside, Tom opened his laptop again. The veteran's post had vanished. Deleted. No trace left. Someone didn't want this dog to exist. He leaned back, staring into the dark. Maybe that meant the same people who'd taken Rex's paw were still out there, and maybe they knew exactly who had him now. By dawn, Tom hadn't slept. The message, the vanished account, the dog's trembling whine, they all clung to him like a fever. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee gone cold, staring at the dismantled microchip he'd taken from Rex's shoulder. Dr. Deaton had let him keep it when the scanner failed. "It's fried," she'd said, but Tom had seen worse hardware brought back from the dead. He held it under the lamplight, the circuit scorched, but the serial number barely visible under the burn. He typed it into a database used by K9 handlers, restricted access, but veterans still knew the back doors. The screen hesitated, then blinked alive. Registered to Sentinel Tactical Training Group. Status revoked. His gut tightened. He clicked again, tracing archived records. The company had once been a contractor for the Border Patrol training dogs to detect explosives, narcotics, human trafficking routes. 3 years ago, its license had been revoked after an incident involving animal cruelty and procedural noncompliance. But there was no follow-up, no charges filed. The company address, though marked closed, was still there. Cochise County, a few hours' drive. Tom leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "So you came from hell," he muttered to the dog, asleep near the door. "And hell still has an address?" He printed the file, folded it into his jacket pocket, and grabbed his keys. Before leaving, he knelt beside Rex, brushing a hand over his good paw. "Stay. I'll be back." The dog's eyes followed him with a quiet understanding that made Tom's chest ache. Outside, the sun burned pale and merciless across the horizon. The old Ford rattled along cracked asphalt, each mile pulling him deeper into the kind of trouble he used to run from. The building, when he found it, looked abandoned, chain-link fences, sagging signs bleached by the Arizona heat. But the details were wrong. The lock on the gate was new. Fresh tire tracks scored the dust. He got out, walking slowly, boots crunching gravel, the air still enough to hear his own breath. Through a broken window, he saw faint movement, a light flicker, then vanish. Someone had been here. He took a step closer, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Tom Harland?" The voice was male, raspy, deliberate. "Who's asking? Someone who used to work for Sentinel. I saw your post before it disappeared." Tom's pulse quickened. "You deleted it. Not me. They monitor those groups. You need to stop digging." "Not gonna happen," Tom said. Silence crackled for a beat. Then the man sighed. "Check your email. You need to see something." The call ended. Tom's phone pinged. One new message, no sender. A video file attached. He hit play. The screen filled with harsh fluorescent light, a concrete room, the sound of dogs barking faintly in the background. Then the camera focused on a single shepherd, restrained on a metal frame, trembling. A strap bound its muzzle, and a motorized wire loop was fixed around its front leg. A man's voice off-screen said, "Increase tension." The loop tightened, slicing shallow into fur and skin. The dog yelped once, a sound that clawed straight through Tom's chest. "We call it resistance conditioning," the voice continued. "Pain builds obedience." Another figure stepped into frame, young, clean-cut eyes, cold and detached. The trainer. Tom's hand froze on the mouse. He knew that face. He'd seen it once at a reunion cookout, the son of Colonel William Reeves, Tom's old commanding officer. The same man who'd pinned his silver star. The same man who'd told him, "You've done enough. Go live your life." Tom's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Son of a bitch," he whispered. On screen, the dog collapsed, limp. The trainer removed the loop blood, slicking his gloves. "Next one," he said flatly. The video ended. Tom sat back, heart pounding, the room spinning with rage and disbelief. He remembered Reeves's face, the lectures about honor discipline duty. Now his son was running torture camps for profit under the banner of training. He opened the email again, but the attachment had vanished. The file deleted itself. Then another ping. A text. "Stop, or they'll make you disappear too." Tom's eyes darkened. He walked to the window, staring out at the fading sun bleeding into the desert horizon. He'd buried too many ghosts to be afraid of new ones. Behind him, Rex stirred, letting out a low growl that rumbled deep and steady. Tom turned toward him. "Yeah, I feel it too." He crouched beside the dog, his hand finding the edge of the bandage. "We're not done," he said softly. Rex leaned into his palm. Steady, silent, the kind of trust only born from shared pain, outside the first stars began to pierce the twilight. Somewhere in Cochise County, someone was still turning that motorized wire, still teaching obedience through agony. Tom reached for his keys again. He wasn't looking for a mystery anymore. He was answering a call. The next morning, Tom drove east the desert, stretching endlessly under a bleached sky. The road shimmered like liquid glass, and every mile carried the weight of ghosts. He hadn't seen Colonel William Reeves in nearly a decade, not since the memorial service where the colonel had gripped his shoulder and said, "You did your part, son. Go live your peace." But peace had never been more than a rumor. Tom's hand tightened on the wheel as he turned toward the gated community outside Sierra Vista. The Reeves estate stood like a fortress in the desert red brick high walls, flags fluttering above trimmed hedges that looked out of place in this barren heat. He parked by the curb, grabbed the printed Sentinel file, and walked to the door. Before he could knock, it opened. A woman in her 50s, sharp features softened by time, gave him a cautious look. "You must be Tom," she said. "He's been expecting you." Tom froze. "Expecting me? He saw your post before it vanished," she said quietly. "He knows why you're here." She led him down a long corridor lined with photos. Soldiers in uniform K9S, standing proud beside handlers. At the end of the hall, Colonel Reeves sat behind a broad oak desk, sunlight pouring across his medals and framed commendations. Age had carved deeper lines into his face, but his eyes, those cold, decisive eyes, hadn't changed. At ease, Sergeant Reeves set his voice gravel and command. Tom hesitated, then stood stiffly. "Sir." "You've still got that tone," Reeves remarked, rising from his chair. "Old habits die slow, don't they?" Tom laid the file on the desk. "I found something," he said, voice tight. "A Shepherd XK9. Mutilated. The chip traces back to Sentinel. I saw a video, sir. Dogs being cut trained through pain." Reeves didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his cufflinks. "And what exactly do you want from me?" Answers Tom said. "Your son was in that video." The colonel's jaw flexed once. "You're mistaken." "No, sir." Tom said quietly. "I wish I was." A long silence filled the room, the only sound the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Reeves finally leaned forward. "You don't understand what these dogs are for now," he said flatly. "You think this is about cruelty. It's about survival. Do you know how many officers these animals save every year? You want to cry over one dog when hundreds die because they weren't ready for pain." Tom's pulse pounded in his ears. "Ready for pain. You're breaking them, not training them. That dog lost his leg, sir." Reeves stood, his tone rising for the first time. "You left the battlefield, Harland, but the world didn't. There are men out there who would gut a child for $50, and these dogs, these tools keep them from getting that chance." "Tools?" Tom spat the word like venom. "They were soldiers. You taught me to treat them like partners." Reeves' gaze hardened. That was before Washington cut our funding, before private contracts filled the gap. "You think patriotism pays for training centers someone has to keep the lights on?" Tom stared at him, disbelief twisting into anger. "So you sell torture as discipline. You let your son turn it into a business." Reeves walked to the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass. "You think too small," he said. "Sentinel was never about training for law enforcement. It's a testing ground. The Border Patrol, the military, they need results. Pain tolerance, response under duress. We give them that. At what cost?" Tom demanded. "You lost your damn soul, sir." The colonel turned sharply, eyes flaring. "Careful, Sergeant." "No, you be careful." Tom said, his voice low but trembling. Because one of your results is in my living room, breathing proof of what you're doing. And if you think I'll keep quiet, Reeve stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You think you can fight this, he said. You think your moral outrage will stop what's already written into federal contracts, walk away? That's the only way you stay breathing. Tom didn't answer. He grabbed the file off the desk and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Reeves said softly, I saved your life once. Don't make me regret it. Tom stopped for half a second, his throat tightening with old gratitude and new disgust. You saved me, yeah, he said. Guess I owe you, but I don't owe you my silence. As he stepped outside, the air hit him like heat off a blast wave. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, though he hadn't smoked in years. Every word from Reeves echoed like an old wound reopening. Back at the truck, Tom sat for a long time before starting the engine. The sun was sinking low now, turning the desert to rust and shadow. He glanced at the printout again. The Sentinel equipment list caught his eye. A small note in the corner, prototype auto-tension restraint developed under military research program HAR-9. His own initials, Harland, Project 9. His stomach dropped. He remembered it now, a field test in Iraq early 2008. They'd used auto-tightening restraint lines for explosive drills. He'd helped design them to save handlers from sudden pulls, and now, years later, those same designs had turned into instruments of mutilation. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, heart-pounding shame flooding him. You son of a bitch, he whispered. But he wasn't sure if he meant Reeves, his son, or himself. The horizon blurred behind a film of dust and sunset, and for the first time in years, Tom felt like the war had followed him home. The drive back from Sierra Vista felt longer than it should have. The radio stayed off. The only sound inside the truck was the faint rattle of the glove box and the quiet hum of guilt that refused to die down. By the time Tom pulled into his driveway, the sky had already burned into dusk. Rex limped to the door to greet him, tail flicking weakly. Tom crouched, brushing a hand over the dog's neck, feeling the pulse of warmth beneath his fingers. You knew, he murmured. You knew who did this. The dog leaned into him, eyes steady, patient, as if saying he'd been waiting for Tom to catch up. Inside, the air felt heavy. The old TV flickered in the corner, showing a muted news segment about military funding cuts. Tom tossed his keys on the counter, then went straight to his desk. He needed facts. He needed to see how deep this ran. Reeves had said the word contracts, and contracts meant paperwork. He logged into an old government archive portal, still accessible through his veteran credentials. It was meant for case studies and field reports, but buried deep within, there was a familiar folder name, K9 Program Sentinel Auxiliary Support. His fingers hovered before clicking. Hundreds of PDF files loaded, some redacted, some marked internal use only. He opened one at random. K9, subject hash 0146, termination record. The notes were clinical, removed for non-compliance. Subject displayed resistance to command stimuli. Behavioral correction failed. Disposed August 14th, 2019. Another file. Same phrase. Removed for non-compliance. Another. And another. The words repeated like a verdict with no appeal. Tom scrolled faster, his pulse thudding in his temples. Each line was a dog that had refused to break and paid for it. He clicked on a link labeled Training Review Footage Archive, expecting nothing. Instead, a list of video codes appeared, old timestamps some years before Sentinel's license had been revoked. One of them caught his eye. Handler Unit HAR-9RX. His breath hitched. HR-9, his own code prefix from when he'd tested the restraint prototypes. RX, a unit designation for a specific K9. Rex. His throat went dry. He double-clicked. The video opened to static, then sharpened into view. A dim training room, the same concrete floor as the previous, recording the same steel apparatus. The camera angle faced a restrained dog, younger, stronger, but unmistakably Rex. The handler's voice came first, one Tom didn't recognize. Subject RX resisting. Off-screen, another voice answered sharp and cold. Increase the tension. He'll break or he'll learn. Tom's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Reeves. The elder. Not his son. The colonel himself. The loop tightened, the whine of the motor blending with Rex's scream, raw, panicked, and painfully human in its desperation. Tom slammed the laptop shut, shaking bile rising in his throat. He stumbled to the sink, gripping the edge until his knuckles whitened. The sound still echoed in his skull, that scream, that command. He wanted to forget it, but it clung like oil. He looked down at Rex, sleeping restlessly near the couch, bandaged stump, twitching in dreams. "You were under my command," he whispered hoarsely. "You were mine." The realization hit harder than any blast he'd survived overseas. Rex wasn't just a victim. He was his soldier, one of the dogs trained under his own oversight, the ones he'd left behind when his unit dissolved. He thought they'd been reassigned. He thought they were safe. He was wrong. The shame hit like a gut punch. His chest felt tight, his eyes burning. "Jesus Christ," he said, voice breaking. "They used my designs. My dogs." He dropped to his knees beside Rex, burying his face in the dog's fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry." Rex stirred one paw, resting gently on his shoulder, as if forgiving him for things he couldn't forgive himself for. Tom stayed there for a long time, the room silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. When he finally stood, something inside him had shifted. He walked back to the desk, reopened the laptop, and replayed the footage. This time he didn't look away. Every sound, every command burned into him like a brand. Reeves's voice wasn't just giving orders, it was enjoying control. The calm cruelty of it was worse than rage. He paused the frame and zoomed in. Behind the dog, barely visible on the far wall, hung a small placard. Property of Sentinel Tactical U.S. Border Division Contract 47A. There it was proof, not rumor, not paranoia, contracts, funding, government backing. The same system that had taught him honor had funded this. His hands trembled as he pulled a small flash drive from a drawer and copied the video. Then, on impulse, he searched the public record for Sentinel's funding source. A name appeared in bold Reeves Consulting, LLC. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The war had never ended. It had just changed uniforms. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Rex whimpered softly in his sleep, caught in dreams of pain Tom couldn't erase. He walked over, knelt beside him again, whispering, "You didn't break. That's why they cut you. But we're not done." His voice cracked at the edges, but his eyes were steady now. The guilt had turned to something else, resolve. For the first time in years, Tom Harland knew exactly what he was going to do, and somewhere deep in that quiet house, under the hum of the night, the war began again, this time on his terms. Tom waited until nightfall. The desert lay under a pale moon, silent but watchful, as if even the stars were holding their breath. He loaded his old Beretta into a shoulder holster, slid the flash drive into his pocket, and looked down at Rex, resting near the truck's tire. The dog's prosthetic paw gleamed faintly under the porch light. "You don't have to come," Tom whispered. Rex lifted his head, eyes burning with a quiet resolve that said there was no need for words. Together they drove toward the outskirts of Cochise County, the same road that had haunted his mind for weeks. Every mile deeper into the desert felt like a step back into war. The coordinates from the Sentinel file led him to the old training compound, the one he thought was long abandoned. He killed the headlights half a mile away and continued on foot. The air was cold, dry, and smelled faintly of metal. As he crested a ridge, he froze. Below the facility glowed with life floodlights on vehicles parked along the fence, men moving between prefabricated structures. Not abandoned, rebuilt. He crouched low, heart pounding. Through his binoculars, he saw a sign newly hung on the gate, Reeves Tactical Solutions, Private K-9 Operations. His throat went dry. The same blood money, just under a different name. He slipped closer, moving through the mesquite brush, every movement deliberate. Voices carried through the dry wind, men shouting commands, dogs barking in sharp, disciplined bursts. Training sessions. Only this time he knew what training meant. He reached the side fence, cut the padlock with a rusted bolt cutter, and slipped inside. The sound hit him first, a rhythmic hum, mechanical and sinister. Inside one of the metal sheds, he found the source. Rows of cages lined the walls, each holding a shepherd or Malinois eyes glazed with exhaustion. Some bore scars, others fresh stitches. The hum came from the restraint rigs, his rigs whirring automatically, tightening and releasing in timed intervals. A grotesque metronome of obedience. His breath trembled as he whispered, "Jesus Christ." He moved deeper inside camera, on his phone recording everything. Then he heard footsteps, approaching fast. He ducked behind a crate, heart hammering. 2 men entered, both in tactical vests, rifles slung low. "Unit 3's ready for the endurance test," one said. "You seen the new recruit? The Colonel's boy's running point now?" Tom's grip tightened on the phone. The sun again, the cycle repeating. The men passed, laughing about quotas about eliminating weak stock. He waited until their voices faded, then slipped toward the far end of the warehouse, where a side door led to an open training yard. Floodlights washed everything in sterile white. There, under a metal awning, he saw another shepherd strapped to a restraint rig, trembling violently. A young trainer barked commands while the machine's cable whined tighter and tighter. The dog's paw pressed desperately against the ground, seeking escape that wouldn't come. "Hold fast," the trainer yelled. Tom's chest constricted. The same phrase, his phrase, "hold fast." Something inside him snapped. He stepped out of the shadows, gun raised. "Stop." The young trainer froze, eyes wide. "Who the hell? Turn that off!" Tom ordered, voice steady. The man hesitated. Tom fired a warning shot into the dirt. The motor stopped. The dog slumped forward, panting, but before Tom could move closer, something hard struck the back of his skull. He fell to one knee, stars bursting behind his eyes. A voice growled, "Didn't think we'd see you again, Sergeant Harland." He turned dizzy to see 2 men, older armed faces, half-shadowed. The taller one smirked. "The Colonel said you couldn't let it go." They yanked the gun from his hand, kicked him hard in the ribs, and dragged him toward a post near the training rig. They bound his wrists with industrial wire, the same kind they used on the dogs. His head spun, vision doubling, but his mind stayed sharp enough to notice the words painted on the metal wall beside him. Faded, but visible under the floodlight. "Pain builds obedience." The letters hit like a blow. He spat blood onto the dirt. "That what you tell yourselves?" the shorter guard sneered. "It's what works." Then from behind them, a growl low rising. "Rex!" Tom barely saw him before he struck. The shepherd lunged from the dark jaws, locking onto the taller man's arm. The gun clattered to the ground. The other man swung a baton, striking Rex hard across the flank. The dog yelped but didn't let go. Tom struggled against the wire, the pain biting deep into his wrists. "Rex!" he shouted. The shorter man kicked the dog viciously again and again, until Rex released his grip and fell back, chest, heaving a dark stain spreading through his fur. "You son of a," Tom twisted, using the moment to wrench the wire tighter around his wrist, sawing against the post. It sliced into his skin, but he didn't stop until the cable snapped. He grabbed the fallen baton and swung with everything he had, connecting squarely with the man's jaw. He dropped instantly. The other staggered back, bleeding from the arm, scrambling for his gun. Tom fired first, one clean shot to the shoulder. The man screamed and collapsed. Tom stumbled toward Rex, dropping to his knees. The dog tried to stand, but fell again, his breathing ragged. Tom pressed a hand to the wound, voice shaking. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me." Blood soaked through his fingers, hot and slick. The floodlights flickered shouts, echoing from outside the yard. More men coming. Tom grabbed his phone, pocketed the flash drive, and lifted Rex as best he could. The dog's head rested against his chest, eyes, half-open gaze, unfocused, but trusting. He staggered toward the gate, every step a fight. Behind him, the words on the wall glared in the light. One last time, pain builds obedience. He looked back once, breath trembling. "Not tonight," he muttered. The world blurred as more lights flared at the edge of the yard. Then everything went white. The world returned in fragments, the hum of fluorescent lights, the antiseptic sting in the air, a beeping monitor that kept time like a heartbeat, not his own. Tom blinked into the sterile white glare, the ceiling tiles swimming in and out of focus. His ribs burned when he tried to move. His throat felt like sandpaper. Then a voice, soft but steady. "You're awake." He turned his head, wincing, and saw a woman in scrubs standing beside him. She was in her 40s, auburn hair tucked under a surgical cap, eyes that carried both exhaustion and kindness. "I'm Dr. Lillian Carr. You're at Cochise Veterinary Hospital." Tom frowned, confusion breaking through the haze. "Veterinary. He's alive," she said, quickly reading his mind. "Your dog. He's alive, but—" Her voice softened, and something in her tone made the room tilt again. But he asked, forcing the word through dry lips. He came in with massive internal bleeding and severe damage to his foreleg. "We had to amputate what was left." Tom's chest tightened. He stared at her, the meaning sinking in like a slow knife. "You're saying he didn't lose that paw saving himself," she said gently. "He saved you." For a long moment the machines hummed, and the air seemed to disappear. He turned away, swallowing hard, blinking fast. Memories of that night flooded back, the floodlights, the screams, the sound of Rex's body hitting the dirt. He wanted to believe it hadn't been real, but the pain in his ribs told him it was. When Dr. Carr left, he pulled himself upright, despite the protests of every bone in his body. He shuffled toward the adjoining recovery room. Through the small glass window, he saw him Rex lying on a padded mat, his body covered in bandages, his breathing shallow but steady. The stump where his other front paw had been was now wrapped neatly, the prosthetic removed, and resting on a tray beside him. Tom pressed his hand against the glass. "You stubborn bastard," he whispered. "You did it again." The dog's ear twitched faintly as if he'd heard. Tom sat in silence for hours, watching the rise and fall of that fragile chest. The next morning he woke to the sound of voices in the hall, firm, official, rehearsed. 2 men in dark suits entered the room, badges clipped to their belts. "Mr. Harland," one asked. "Detective Reed, Tucson County. This is Detective Holloway. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident near Sentinel Compound." Tom nodded slowly. "You found it?" "We found what's left of it," Reed said, flipping open a notepad. "Can you describe what happened?" Tom told them everything: the lights, the cages, the phrase on the wall, the men with guns, Rex. When he finished, Reed glanced at Holloway, who gave a subtle shake of his head. "And the bodies?" Tom asked. "You found them, right? The dogs. The equipment." Reed hesitated. "Mr. Harland," he said carefully, "we searched the property top to bottom. The buildings were empty. No animals, no equipment, no sign of recent activity." Tom's brow furrowed. "That's not possible. I was there 2 nights ago. There was no evidence of occupation," Reed said, tone clinical. "The structures were gutted. Fresh paint. The power grid disconnected months ago. Even the tire tracks were gone. Looks like someone wanted a clean slate." Tom's stomach turned. "You think I made this up?" Holloway lifted a hand. "No one's saying that, but without evidence." "Evidence?" Tom snapped. "I had video, footage." He reached for his jacket, the one they'd brought from the scene, and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, but the gallery was empty. Every file, every folder wiped clean. He froze. "No," he whispered. "It was right here. We checked the device," Reed said. "No recoverable data. Maybe damaged during the fight. No." Tom said again, voice trembling now. "Someone erased it. Someone's covering this up." The detectives exchanged a look that said they'd already written their report. Reed closed his notebook. "If anything turns up, we'll let you know." They left as quickly as they came, their footsteps fading down the sterile hall. Tom sat there staring at his blank phone screen. His blood simmered. Someone had cleaned everything, not just the site, but the evidence trail itself. That kind of precision didn't come from hired guards. It came from people with reach. People like Reeves. He rose to his feet, ignoring the pain that flared through his ribs. Through the glass, he saw Rex stir his one remaining front leg, pushing weakly against the bedding as he tried to sit up. Tom opened the door, kneeling beside him. "Easy, soldier," he whispered. Rex's breathing steadied at the sound of his voice. "They erased it all, buddy. Everything. But they can't erase you." The dog blinked slow and calm, as if agreeing. Tom exhaled a faint tremor in his chest. "We're not done," he said. "Not yet." Later that day, Dr. Carr returned to change Rex's bandages. "You should rest," she told Tom. "You're both lucky to be alive." He gave a dry, humorless smile. "Luck's not what kept us alive." She hesitated, studying him. "You're not planning to go back, are you?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. When she left, he sat beside Rex's mat, again hand resting gently on the dog's neck. The faint hum of the machines filled the room like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep down, he knew the cost of what came next would be high. But after what they'd done, after what they'd taken, he also knew he'd already paid too much to walk away now. The nights were colder now, or maybe it was just Tom. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since the hospital. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rex's leg gone, and the words burned into the wall. Pain builds obedience. He spent his days sitting near the kennel where Rex rested, waiting for something he couldn't name. One evening, while changing the bandage near the shoulder stump, he noticed a faint metallic glint beneath the scar tissue. "What the hell is that?" he murmured. He fetched a sterilized tweezer and gently probed the edge until a tiny black fragment came loose, smaller than a fingernail, flat, and etched with micro-circuit lines. Not a tracking chip, not a tag. Something else. Dr. Carr examined it under her lens. "This isn't medical," she said. "Military-grade data core may be encrypted." Tom stared at the piece, realization dawning, slow but sharp. "It's not the original chip. It's a piggyback implant." "Meaning?" she asked. "Meaning someone didn't just monitor them. They logged them. That night he drove home, hooked the microdata to his old Army laptop, and prayed the tech training from years ago hadn't faded. It took hours of command line decryption, dozens of password permutations, and half a bottle of bourbon. But at last, the screen flickered and opened a series of files, coordinates, serial numbers, coded logs. His pulse quickened. Shipment manifests, export records. Each line read like a ghost list, K9301D. Transferred via RAV Logistics. Destination Tangier. Status, non-compliant. Reassign. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Each labeled Reeves Tactical Behavioral Training Division. He scrolled further until the metadata showed timestamps and routes, ports, private airfields, transfer points across the border. The dogs that failed obedience weren't euthanized. They were sold. The screen blurred as his breath caught. They were sold. Not to police units, but to private security firms and foreign militias groups that bought trained aggression. He pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to steady himself. "You son of a bitch," he muttered, voice trembling. He knew what he had now, proof that could burn the whole network down. But it wasn't enough to post online. It would vanish like everything else. He needed a voice louder than his, someone the system couldn't silence. So he called in an old contact, Dana Kessler, a war correspondent who'd covered Fallujah with them back in 2006. She'd seen more truth buried than most generals. When she picked up, her voice was the same, low, sharp, distrustful of everything but facts. "Tom Harland," she said. "Didn't think I'd ever hear your name again." "You're about to hear more than that," he replied. They met at a roadside diner just outside Tucson. Same kind of place where the world didn't look twice at broken men with worse stories. Tom brought the drive. Dana brought her recorder. He told her everything, the compound, the erased evidence, the chip, the dogs. She didn't interrupt once, only leaned in, eyes narrowing with every detail. "You have proof of shipment coordinates, serial logs, even export licenses. Everything ties back to Reeves." She whistled low. "That's not just animal cruelty, Tom. That's federal crime. Smuggling under government contract. I know," he said. "And they'll bury me for it." "Not if you go public first," she countered. "Give me the footage, I'll burn it across every screen in the country." He hesitated. "You sure you want in on this? I don't do safe stories," she said. "Send me the drive." He slid it across the table. But before she could tuck it away, a shadow fell over their booth. "I wouldn't." The voice made the air drop 10 degrees. Colonel Reeves stood at the end of the table, flanked by 2 men in plain suits. His presence filled the space like smoke, slow choking, inescapable. Tom's jaw clenched. Guess the graveyard shift's running late tonight. Reeves smiled faintly. You always did have a mouth, Sergeant. Shame it'll be the thing that buries you. Dana's hand went for her bag, but one of the suits blocked her. Leave it, Reeves said. You think you can scare me now? Tom asked. No, Reeves said softly. I don't need to scare you. I just need to remind you what happens when a man with your record starts talking. Those civilians your team hit in Samara don't. Tom snapped, rising from his seat. The memories hit like a gunshot. A burned village orders shouted over static a line of names that never left his conscience. Reeves's smile widened shark-like. You leak this, and I'll make sure your record ends you. You'll go down as a disgrace. They'll forget what we did, and remember only what you did. Tom stared at him for a long, trembling second. Then he exhaled. It already did. The words came out quiet, but final. Reeves's expression flickered just for an instant as if he hadn't expected defiance. Dana watched him carefully, fingers brushing the recorder under the table. We're done here, Reeves said finally, straightening his jacket. You'll regret this, Harland. I already do, Tom said. As soon as the door shut behind them, Dana reached for the recorder. He's bluffing, she said. They can't scrub everything. Tom shook his head. He's not bluffing. He doesn't have to. But that doesn't mean we stop. He took the drive back from her eyes, steady now. If they want to silence us, they'll have to look me in the eye this time. Dana met his gaze, understanding the weight of what he meant. Then I guess we start a war, she said. He nodded. One they can't erase. Outside the desert, wind picked up again, carrying sand like sparks across the asphalt. Somewhere out there beyond the diner lights, a truth was waiting to be dragged into daylight. And Tom Harland was done asking permission to do it. It had been 47 days since the raid. The air outside still smelled faintly of dust and motor oil, the kind of smell that never quite left a soldier's clothes. Tom stood in the clinic's rehab room, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, trying to hide the tremor in them. Rex stood on the padded floor in front of him, wrapped in a harness that gleamed with new metal. The prosthetic leg titanium alloy, precision-jointed, custom-fitted by a biomedical engineer from Phoenix, reflected the morning light like a small victory. Dr. Carr adjusted the straps, murmuring encouragements. He'll need time, she said. The nerves have to adapt, balance has to retrain. Don't expect much the first week. Tom nodded absently, but his eyes never left Rex. The dog's tail flicked once his gaze locked on Tom, with that same soldier's patience waiting ready determined. All right, buddy, Tom whispered. You and me, one step at a time. He took a half step back and said quietly but firmly, heal. The word barely hung in the air before Rex moved. The first motion was clumsy, a stutter of metal against mat, then smoother, steadier. His body adjusted instinctively, the prosthetic tapping the floor with soft, metallic rhythm. Tom's throat tightened as he watched. Good boy, he breathed. Rex stopped beside him, tail wagging eyes bright. Dr. Carr looked stunned. That's impossible. He shouldn't be able to balance like that yet. Tom smiled faintly. He's a soldier. He doesn't wait for permission. That night, Tom sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the laptop. The flash drive Dana had returned to him lay beside the mug of cold coffee, the tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. He'd been thinking about Reeves's threat, the files. The ghosts from Samara, the stain on his name that never washed away. But then he looked across the room where Rex lay curled near the door, prosthetic leg, resting easily on the floor, breathing steady and calm. Tom's hands stopped shaking. You didn't hide, he whispered to himself. So neither will I. He plugged in the drive, opened the footage, and hit upload. This time not to private channels. This time to every Veterans Forum law enforcement board and public watchdog network he knew. He wrote no caption, no plea for sympathy. Just one line. They took his paw, but not his purpose. The progress bar crawled slowly, painfully, and for every second it inched forward, his heart pounded harder. When it hit 100%, Tom sat back, staring at the screen like it was a fuse he'd just lit. It took less than an hour before the first notification pinged, then another, then hundreds. By dawn, it had crossed 10,000 shares. By the next afternoon, major outlets were quoting fragment screenshots and time-stamped coordinates from the data logs. Forums buzzed with outrage veterans, handlers, officers, everyday citizens. The story spread like fire through dry brush. Illegal K-9 training program uncovered. Links to private military exports under investigation. Dana called him at noon, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "You did it, Tom. The Bureau's already involved. They're freezing Reeves's assets." Tom leaned back against the counter, running a hand over his face. "You sure they can't bury it this time? Not with a million eyes watching," she said. "You broke the silence. Now they'll have to listen." He looked down at Rex, who'd hobbled over, resting his head against Tom's knee. "No," Tom said softly. "He broke it." The following week unfolded like a strange, surreal fog. The headlines grew louder. Photos of the compound, the cages, the rigs flooded social media. Someone leaked the training contracts linking Reeves Tactical to shadow clients in Mexico and Eastern Europe. Congressional offices started making statements, and by the third day, the Department of Justice confirmed it an official federal inquiry into Reeves Tactical Solutions and its affiliates. The man who once lectured him about obedience was now suspended under investigation. When reporters showed up at Tom's house, he refused interviews. He didn't want his face on screens, he wanted the truth to stand on its own. But that didn't stop others. Fellow handlers began sharing their own footage stories of non-compliant dogs, unexplained injuries, silent disappearances. It became a wave, one voice, then a chorus. Justice didn't feel clean or satisfying. It felt like standing in the rain after a wildfire, breathing smoke and ash, knowing the air would sting for a while longer. One evening, Tom and Rex returned to the same desert clearing where it had all started. The sky stretched wide, painted orange and violet. Rex trotted beside him, moving with an odd grace, the metal paw sinking lightly into sand unbothered. Tom stopped, crouched down, and looked at him. "You remember this place?" The dog tilted his head, ears twitching. "This is where you found me," Tom said quietly. "And I thought I was the one saving you." Rex pressed his head into Tom's shoulder, a soft exhale breaking the quiet. For the first time in years, Tom smiled, not the brittle kind, but something deeper, steadier, the kind that came from a wound learning to close. As the sun dipped below the horizon, his phone buzzed, a message from Dana. "They froze his accounts. Arrest warrants incoming. You're officially off their leash, soldier." He stared at the words for a long time, then typed back only 2. "So is he." The wind picked up warm and dry, carrying away the dust of old battles. Tom stood, brushed the sand from his knees, and looked out at the darkening horizon. The war was still out there. Different names, different faces. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone facing it. He looked down at Rex, who stood tall beside him, eyes fixed forward, metal leg glinting like silver under the fading light. "Come on, partner," he said softly. "Let's go home." The morning of the ceremony broke crisp and still, the kind of autumn morning that seemed to remember everything. The sky hung pale blue above Arlington's wide lawns, where rows of white headstones gleamed like quiet witnesses. Flags fluttered in slow rhythm, catching sunlight in a way that made it feel sacred. Tom stood at the base of the memorial steps, his dress uniform pressed and immaculate, though it fit looser now around his shoulders. His chest bore no medals, only the simple bar of service that time hadn't stripped from him. Beside him, Rex waited a silent sentinel in polished harness and prosthetic leg that glinted faintly beneath the sun. The crowd murmured softly, veterans, officers, families all gathered for the National K-9 Remembrance Ceremony. There were speeches, music, the steady tolling of a bell for every fallen dog whose name had been etched in brass. When the announcer finally said Sergeant Thomas Harland and K-9 Rex, the quiet deepened into reverence. Tom exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes, but none heavier than the memory of one voice, Reeves's whispering orders that still echoed years later. He took the first step forward, his cane tapping lightly against the stone. Rex matched his pace without hesitation, the prosthetic paw clicking softly on each stair. For a moment, the sound of it, that small, defiant rhythm, seemed to speak louder than words ever could. When they reached the podium, the master of ceremony, a graying general in full dress, saluted them. "Sergeant Harland," he said, his voice thick with something like pride, "and Canine Rex, for acts of valor and integrity beyond duty, we honor your service." He bent, lifting a medal suspended on a deep blue ribbon. The medallion bore the emblem of the K-9 Corps, a shepherd's silhouette poised mid-guard. The general knelt, draping it gently around Rex's neck. Cameras flashed, but the dog didn't flinch. He simply stood tall, chest-lifted, eyes steady on the horizon. Tom lowered his gaze, his hand resting lightly on Rex's shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't need to. In that silence, every loss, every battle, every moment of guilt and redemption coalesced into one truth. They had both survived, not unscarred, but unbroken. The crowd rose in quiet applause. Not loud, not celebratory, but reverent. The kind of clapping that came from people who understood what courage costs. Afterward, as people dispersed, the speeches fading into the hum of distant traffic, Tom lingered. The grass around the memorial was damp from morning dew, and the air carried the faint sweetness of wreaths laid by grieving hands. Rex lay at his feet, breathing slow and calm, the metal glinting against his fur. Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small plaque, brass polished simple. He had had it made quietly, without ceremony, without permission. He knelt at the base of the main monument, where names of K-9 heroes shimmered under sunlight, found a bare patch of stone, and placed it there. The engraving caught the light. They took his paw, but not his purpose. He hesitated, then traced his thumb along the second line beneath it, words he'd added the night before. "And they will never take another." He stayed like that for a long time, one hand resting on the cold metal, the other on the warm fur beside him. People passed by, some pausing to nod, others to whisper thanks, though none disturbed the moment. A bugler began to play in the distance, the notes carrying across the field like a soft wind over water. Tom closed his eyes. The sound mingled with memories, the ring of gunfire, the hum of restraint rigs, the broken cries that once haunted his nights. But somewhere in that music the noise softened. What remained wasn't pain, it was peace. Rex shifted, leaning lightly against his leg as if to say, "It's over." Tom smiled faintly, his throat tight. "Yeah," he whispered, "it is." The wind picked up, tugging at the flag high above them, and for a brief moment the metal at Rex's neck swung and caught the sun flashing gold like a heartbeat. Nearby, a young boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom," he said softly, "that dog's got a metal leg." She nodded, smiling. "That's not just a dog, sweetheart. That's a hero." Tom heard it and turned slightly, his eyes glistening but steady. He gave the boy a small salute, and the child, grinning, returned it. It was simple, wordless, the kind of gesture that carried meaning without needing history. The bell rang once more, marking the end of the ceremony. Tom stood his knees stiff but sure, and looked out over the field of stones, names of men, women, and dogs who had given more than most could imagine. "You did good, partner," he murmured. Rex's tail brushed his boot in quiet acknowledgement. They turned toward the path that led away from the monument, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Tom didn't look back. He didn't have to. The plaque would stay, the story would live, and justice, imperfect, delayed, but real, had finally found its place. As they walked toward the truck parked under the elm trees, the sky opened wide above them, the kind of endless blue that felt like forgiveness. Rex trotted beside him, his gait uneven but proud, metal paw gleaming with every step. The rhythm of it echoed softly against the stone walkway. One beat human, one beat steel together, steady, together, whole. And for the first time in a long time, Tom Harland felt something that almost resembled peace. If this story moved you, take a second to subscribe and share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes. Which moment hit you the hardest, when Tom found the truth, or when Rex took his first step again? Tell me in the comments. And before you go, let me know where you're watching from, your city, your country. I'd love to know how far stories like this can travel.